Baruch here with genConnect.com, and I'm chatting today with Peter Hirschberg, a creative genius tech entrepreneur who is particularly interested in the intersection between art and data. How are you, Peter?
It's great to be here. This is a show called The Art of Data, and it takes a look at a number of artists that are taking this phenomenon of big data in our society and grabbing data sets and asking how can we see them differently. They are pushing the different contextual ways we can look at data and information. So let me give you an example.
Yeah.
Over here is the work of Luc Dubois. He took an old data set, the presidential State of the Union addresses going back 200 years, and for each president, these eye charts take the most popular words that they used and lay them out, most frequent words to least frequent. So think of it as a record of the rhetoric and priorities of every presidential administration.
So what are some of the surprising things that we notice when we actually run the data sets?
Well, so here's an interesting one. Theodore Roosevelt, completely concerned with kind of putting in reform and with corporations. So you see corporations, railroad, wage, deal, corporation. But here's one that I find very interesting. Let's go over to Franklin Roosevelt. Okay? Roosevelt used the most words in State of the Union addresses because he had 15 of them. So his priorities clearly democratic, unity, allies, kind of all of the priorities of the administration. Immediately afterwards, the Cold War strikes. So here's Truman, Soviet, housing, atomic, communist, Korea, reconversion, and Eisenhower, nuclear, planning, scientific controls, missile developing. So you get an interesting sense of kind of how we went from a couple of socially oriented administrations to suddenly Cold War. And if we take a look at poor Hoover before Roosevelt, not unlike the concerns we have today, unemployment, recovery, distress affected, and then down here, all the infrastructure work that was beginning to go on, waterway, highway systems. So, where else do you get a sense for the priorities over 200 years of these kinds of things? Let's go take a look at a couple of other works. Our first president, the very first word, gentleman. Obviously, a more polite view towards his colleagues than perhaps the rest of the world today.
Exactly.
One of the interesting things that we notice is that these artists are kind of playing with a context game. Take something familiar like an eye chart and put on the unexpected data, and now in that context flip, you start to understand things. Luc Dubois here did something really interesting. He downloaded 17 million records from dating sites. So literally, he and his team signed on to all the dating sites as a straight guy, a gay guy, a straight woman, a gay woman, and got the words that everybody used to describe themselves.
What do you think is most surprising from this data set?
Let's take a look at this. Here's California. There's San Francisco. And if we zoom in on San Francisco, it really is the word gay. That's the word that they use. Southern Marin really is spirituality. And across the bay, there's some questions. Why would it be young or cafe over there? By the way, San Jose is architecture because there's so many software architects. And yet there's certain words we don't understand, like why would Sacramento be afternoon? Or kindness right here in the middle of the state. So when you know an area, you fill in, there's things you know, and then if you have a question, you start really thinking about it. It's a great way of familiarizing people with data and beginning to kind of think about it. I think what this artist is doing with data is kind of what like Warhol or James Rosenquist were doing with consumer imagery and war imagery in the 1960s. All of this stuff that was inundating us, they're beginning to play with it as art, to figure out what does it mean and to help us see it and kind of relate to it differently.
Well, Peter, thank you so much. We certainly got a very different perspective on numbers, on data, on words, and thank you for putting together this incredible exhibit.
There's a really good way to follow up on this. If you go to theartofdata.org, we've kind of laid out this and several other works, as well as kind of an essay that goes into it. So theartofdata.org should give you a sense for this. And 50 years ago at the Aspen Institute, they used the best designers of the day, people like Herbert Baer and Laszlo Mihaly-Nogi, to begin to lay out an understanding of the Aspen ideas of kind of us versus the rest of the world in the Cold War. So to today, great designers are helping us understand the world in new ways.
Well, Peter, thank you for helping us understand this work.
Thanks.
And for more with Peter Hirschberg, be sure to check out genConnect.com and theartofdata.org.